Welcome to this Talks at Google virtual event. I'm Kezia Alfred, and I'm on the Global Operations team in Google's Devices and Services organization. Before we get started, I'd like to remind the audience that we will be taking questions towards the end of the talk. So as you think of questions throughout our conversation, please be sure to add them to the live chat. I'm very excited to introduce today's guest, Lyn Slater. Known on Instagram as Accidental Icon, culture influencer and model Lyn Slater joins us to discuss her memoir, How to Be Old, Lessons in Living Boldly from the Accidental Icon. When Lyn Slater started her fashion blog, Accidental Icon, at age 61, she discovered that followers were flocking to her account for more than just her A-list style. As Lyn flaunted gray hair, wrinkles, and a megadose of self-acceptance, they found in her an alternative model of older life. Someone who defied stereotypes, refused to become invisible, and showed that all women have the opportunity to be relevant and take major risks at any stage of their life. Lyn, it is my pleasure to welcome you to Talks at Google.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. And before we get into our questions, I wanted to start with how are you doing today?
I am fine, thank you. How are you?
I am doing pretty well. I'm looking forward to our talk.
Me too.
Okay, so as I said in my intro, many people know you as Accidental Icon, but you are more than a fashion influencer, a fashion blogger. You're a mother, you're a social work consultant, you're an academic. Nowadays, how would you want to introduce yourself?
Well, I think, again, mother, grandmother, partner, community member. I'll always be a social worker, no matter what, and writer. And so I have actually not done fashion influencing for almost 3 years now.
Okay.
And have a very different life than the one I led as Accidental Icon.
Yeah. And yeah, I know we'll get into that for sure, because I know people are interested both in how you got into it and then your reasons for leaving. So we'll talk a bit more about that. Okay, and so before we get to the Accidental Icon days, as you said, you started at 60, 61, and so you had a lifetime before that. So can you share a little bit about what you did before sort of Accidental Icon became a thing?
Well, I have always been involved in systems that work with women and girls. And so I started my career in the mid-1970s. I had a master's in criminal justice, and I worked in detention facilities for adolescent girls. And through that experience, I began to see, and this was before trauma and abuse and other things were really out there and known. And so I began to understand from my interactions with the young women that I worked with that this was not a criminal justice issue, that a lot of the behavior was really stemming from trauma and abuse. And so that led me into social work, because I was able to look at it from a social work perspective, which always looks at the individual within the environment and context and institutions, that challenge or privilege them. And so I became a social worker. I continued to work in residential placements with adolescent girls and became very frustrated with the system. And so I started to team up with attorneys. And I moved to working at a law firm that had social workers and attorneys representing kids. And I was the director of their sexual abuse program. And during that time, I decided to go back to school and get my PhD.
Nice.
And because of that, Fordham University was starting a interdisciplinary program with their School of Social Work and School of Law. And they recruited me to be a professor in both schools to develop interdisciplinary programs. So that was pretty much what I was doing, teaching at Fordham. I taught for 20 years there, and that's where I was at the time I decided to start Accidental Icon.
Yeah. Okay, that's actually impressive and hard, but necessary work, social work and working with victims of trauma and abuse. And okay, so you're in that space. And so how did Accidental Icon come about? I know there's a blog and then it became more. So how did that happen as you were in the social work and academic space?
Well, one of the things that I developed over my career as a social work was I really started to use creativity and creative experiences as my form of self-care. So I would come to a place where I would be stuck or burnt out, and I would go outside of social work into the arts, and I would either take a course like in improv or creative writing, or put myself into an experience. I worked with other artists creating an installation. And so that was my form of self-care.
Okay.
So I had come to sort of a point in my academic career where I was feeling kind of bored and uncreative and very controlled in how I could present and write about things that were important to me. So I started to take classes in a fashion school in New York City, and they were very random. I did jewelry fabrication, fashion design, and I ended up in this class, which was starting your own vintage business. And everybody kept telling me, you have really interesting style, very unique style. You should start a fashion blog. And so I was like, okay, I know how to write. I know how to research. My partner, who is a scientist by day, is a photographer at night. And I know how to make a website. So I can do it, and I can do it quickly. And so I just started taking photos of me, very street style photos in all parts of New York City, and just putting them up on Instagram, but writing about sort of how clothes could be used to convey identity, how clothing is used to sort of, kind of play with power. And so for some reason, and to this day, I still am not clear why, it kind of went viral, much to my surprise.
Yeah. I mean, I know you're saying you're not sure why, but I think sort of your confidence and sort of being unapologetic about doing what you're doing, like it's not even despite age, just sort of agnostic of age. I think that is very inspiring and motivates people to sort of, hey, that thing that I thought I wasn't going to do anymore, I could do it again. Like, things don't stop after a certain age. So I think seeing someone who is, like you always say, sort of ordinary but interesting do that, I think is definitely motivating and inspiring.
Well, the interesting thing is that when I started, in my mind, it had nothing to do with my age. I was just doing what I always did. And really, the media made it about my age. They, instead of just saying, okay, here's an interesting woman, she was a professor, she reinvented herself, it was, oh, look, she's interested in fashion and she's 61. Oh, she's very good at social media, and oh, she's 64. And so they really made it about age. Because you made such a good point, is that what I did, anybody could do at any time of their life. So it's not about, a particular age.
And I guess around the age part, what either feedback or responses have you gotten from people around I mean, I'm guessing there's some amount of motivation, but I guess, yeah, what feedback or how has the response around age been? Because as much as, maybe it's not about age, because they are for sure between the fashion industry, which is what you were a part of for a while, and I think just life in general, there's just this sense of things start going bad after a certain point. So how have you felt about the response that you get from maybe like everyday people around age and how you're representing yourself?
I think the interesting thing is that my followers on Instagram have always been younger than me.
Okay.
And people are always surprised by that.
Yeah.
But, especially in the first, I would say 6 years, the majority of my followers were 18 to 35.
Okay.
And so at this point now, still 75 to 80% of my followers are 25 to 55.
Okay.
So I think people in my generation who grew up, we were young in the early 70s. We were questioning authority. We were resisting everything. We were saying we'll have sex when we want to have sex and how we want to have sex and with who we want to have sex, cohabitating, just, really not trusting anyone over 30. That why people would think that my generation would age gracefully and just very cooperatively become invisible like our parents and my grandparents. We are not those people.
Yeah.
And so I think we have been reinventing age, and it needed to be reinvented. And because we're living longer, there is a whole uncharted territory that, to me, I see as a creative challenge.
Nice.
So it does not make me afraid.
Yeah.
And so I think the age of the people who follow me, they're watching. They're watching me, and they're watching women my age.
Others, yeah.
And they're saying, okay, we can see that getting older can be different.
Yeah.
And so I think I'm just going to put it out there. We have a big problem in society right now with how we're representing age. So we have these two poles, like everything else in our world is polarized. But on one hand, you have this decline narrative. Where you're going to have dementia and you're going to be disabled and you're going to be a burden on your family and you're going to, be blood sucking from society and ruining it for every generation after you. But now we have this other one on the other end who is ageless and fit and running marathons till they're 90 and hot and lots of money to travel the world, to start a business, to do whatever, and they need nothing. So we have like these two extremes, and the reality of people aging, and I put myself in this middle, is that there's really amazingly great things about being older, but there's things that aren't so great. And so if we deny that we need anything, then society is not going to give it to us. Designers are not going to innovate for us. Policymakers are not going to write policies.
Accommodate,
So, again, just today, I got something in my email from a medical equipment place that wanted me to promote them. And so most of the things are about that decline narrative. But I can tell you from people who email me, I've been doing a lot of events with this book, the people who are in crowds, that those two poles don't represent them.
The majority. Nice.
They're like everyday people getting older in exciting and creative ways and figuring out how to deal with challenges so that life doesn't stop.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, this idea that it's not necessarily either or, but it's in the middle and dealing with elements from both, but combining them based on reality, but also still hope and intention and dreams. So yeah, I like that.
Exactly. And, you know, I read quite a few young writers, and a lot of young feminist writers are writing about motherhood, and they're saying it's great, but it's also not great at times.
Yeah,
and they're writing about marriage, and they're writing about divorce. And so I feel like they're being honest, and they're asking questions, and they're putting it out there. So I think older women have a responsibility to be honest to younger women too.
Yeah, I've heard themes of that with some of my friends, sort of talking through, you know, what have their mothers gone through and grandmothers, and sort of the realistic version of what's happening. And so you sort of are informed, okay, this is in my family, or this is something that has come up. And so we're not necessarily going into it blind. So this idea of the older, or I guess the generation before, or just every generation being honest to themselves and to others in their family. Yeah. Okay. Nice. Okay. So I think we can, I mean, a lot of different things came up there. I think maybe going to sort of social media and like that sort of element of your life, because like with your book, I have my copy right here. The first part of the story in the book is around sort of the social media furor that happened. And then you talk about sort of not the decline, but how you came out of it. So I guess what was it like being accidental icon in sort of social media influencer, and then what got you to where you are now, where you sort of left it behind?
Well, I think for the first 6 years that I was doing it, I was doing a lot of work that was not happening on Instagram. So I was getting some modeling campaigns. I was just following interesting opportunities. I've been in some music videos.
Oh, nice.
I worked with a lot of independent magazines, a lot of fashion design students. I did a lot of traveling to talk to people about personal style and fashion. And then I started to transition and do my work and get paid primarily through what I did on Instagram.
I see. Okay.
And that is when everything began to turn for me.
Okay.
Because up until that point, I felt like I had it was creative. I was not necessarily, I was still working as a full-time professor until 2019.
Okay.
So I was not really doing it for money.
Yeah.
I was doing it for the experience, for the fun of it, for the traveling.
Nice.
And all of those good things.
Yeah.
And then in the transition to Instagram, it becomes all about money.
Okay. Yeah.
And one becomes a brand.
Yeah.
And one loses the creative autonomy that I had, because, you know, the brands, they will send you briefs, and they'll show you examples of photos, and they'll tell you what should be in the caption, and they'll send you, these are the required hashtags. And if they don't like your photos, they send them back, and you have to reshoot them. And so I found myself spending 90% of my day on Instagram, because then you have to keep engaging, and you have to make sure your followers are up. And I just became more and more and more unhappy.
Yeah. And
right before the pandemic hit, I was just in a very bad place, burnout, and just really deep unhappiness. And so Also, during the time I was on Instagram, I did not write that much on my blog, which had been a really big part of why I did this, to be a writer, to be able to write. And I was doing absolutely no writing.
Okay.
And so the pandemic made everything stop.
Yeah.
And it gave me the time to reflect. I started to write. I started to do mini blogging on Instagram instead of sponsored posts. And I had also started to be confronted by some older women who, you know, at this point, society was kind of saying, oh, look at this cool older woman. This is how everybody should be old. And they pretty much said to me, you know what? I can't be old like you, because people were not naming my privilege in what I was doing.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I had started to have conversations with these women. And it really, you know, I've been a social worker, so my old social work mind came.
Yeah.
And I just made a decision that even though it was more financially lucrative than any social work or professor job I ever had by quite a bit.
Okay. Yeah.
But I made a decision that it was not making me happy, and it was not in line with my values anymore.
Yeah.
So it's been almost 3 years, a little over 3, that I have done a sponsored post.
Okay.
And
how does it feel?
It feels great.
Nice.
It feels really great.
Okay.
And in that space, right, I did get a book contract. I was able to write this book. I've been writing on Substack.
Okay.
And really that, I think, makes me feel happy and fulfilled. And that, along with my family and my community here, is what makes me happy right now.
Nice. I mean, it's a lot up and down, but it's nice to hear the journey of it all. You know, starting with something you're interested in, giving it a shot, playing that out. Then I think in your book, you're very good about, I think, assessing yourself at certain intervals. And so, you know, having some pause and reflection, and how do I feel about this? And then adjusting what you feel like you need to adjust to get where you want to be. So yeah, I like the example of still trying it out. So it's not as much of a, hey, this thing could go wrong, let me not even try it at all, versus trying it out and then just having check-ins with yourself about how you want the next year or the next decade to be.
Yeah, I mean, life is an experiment. You can't control what is going to happen to you. We think we can. But
sometimes I want to. But
I know, but we can. And that's the thing too, is that being older to me is like any other time in my life. You have opportunities, you have challenges, you have sickness, you have health, your body changes, and you have losses, and you learn how to respond and adapt to that. And sometimes it is through experimenting. But I think the difference when you're my age is, when I was 20, in my toolbox, I probably had a hammer and a nail. But at 70, I've got a big chest that is full of skills, experiences that I can apply to any challenge that comes my way. And so it really is the same but different than any other time of life. We make too much of a big deal about it.
Oh, nice. Okay, so I think I want to talk a little bit about fashion, because I think, you know, again, even if we take out your time in the fashion industry, style and fashion was always something that was a part of you. And so I guess, could you talk about maybe what your relationship with, whether it's fashion or style, what it's like now?
So I think I always like to make the distinction. I never considered myself to be interested in fashion per se. I never dressed according to trends. I never really looked much at fashion until I decided to study it. Because I have always believed that clothes are a way to express your identity and to experiment with potential identities. And so also in my work, I saw how much power people put on clothing. So for example, when you go to prison or you go to a hospital, they take your clothing away. And clothing is very much about your identity. And so that's the interesting thing for me. And I think that's why I always had a very unique style that no one else had, because I wasn't looking at fashion shows or I really saw clothes more as a material to sort of like be a sculptor with.
Okay. Yeah. Nice. Okay. And then writing. I know we touched on writing, but how has the writing experience been? I guess things that were surprising, things that you expected. What's it like for you being a writer?
Well, I think the interesting thing is, I've written my whole life. And as an academic, I have published an academic text, and I have also, so this is not really the first time I am being a writer. I wrote a blog for 10 years. So I think, this is the first time that I'm doing more of creative nonfiction. That is very different than academic writing. So I found the process, my first impulse was to make this book a little bit more of a how-to academic kind of thing about being old. But I realized as I started the writing process and the things that happened to me right before that I really wanted to write a memoir. And not a book like that. So one of the reasons that I picked the editor I picked, because I was fortunate, I have an amazing literary agent.
Oh, nice.
Which again, all came to me through Accidental Icon, because publishing does like those big platforms.
Sure. Yes.
But she got me a lot of publishers to choose from, and I did pick an editor who was quite young, but I could tell from our conversation that she kind of knew the book I wanted to write. And she was going to support me in writing it. And she did.
Nice.
And so I think one of the amazing things in writing academic textbooks, the editors really don't work with you all that much. But in this case, my editor, she had just the perfect amount of support. My first draft was a total disaster mess because right after I signed my book contract, my mother declined and passed away.
I'm sorry.
And so I was also grieving my academic career. I was grieving Accidental Icon. It was just a big ball of loss.
Everything happening,
And I'll never forget it. She said to me, "You know what? Everything's here. We just don't have the right container." So what she and I came up with, which turned out to be the perfect container, was she said, "Why don't we do the last decade? And each year can be a chapter." And so that's the good thing. I think I think I shouldn't have been surprised, but I think I was a bit about, how much work promoting a book is. And I found myself back in a situation where I was promoting a product, my book.
Yeah.
So that was a little challenging to me. It was very triggering to me, actually. So, but I had a great team at my publishing house, and they were absolutely supportive and just helped me, get through those moments. And they put up with me because, I had some no's. And so at the end of the day, it was for me a great experience. And I'm completely reinforced with the idea that I made the right choice about my publisher and editor.
Nice. Oh, that's good to hear. Okay, I think we're going to move to audience questions, and I should have prompted the audience a bit more earlier. But if anyone has additional questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, because we're going to go to audience questions really soon. Okay, so I guess going back to the writing aspect, the outlining it by the last decade, I thought was a really fun sort of twist on the book, and even the chapter numbers. It wasn't 1, 2, 3, 4. It started at 60. So I liked the container that you ended up with.
Yeah. And you could see how much life happened to me.
Yes.
Between 60 and 70.
Yes.
And so I hope that people, and I'm getting a lot of private messages and emails from people who have read the book, and they really feel like they were a little scared about that decade. Now they're kind of, okay, I got it. I'm going to go with the flow. I'm going to take that risk. And even from younger people too. So
yeah. Because even when I told others that I'd be interviewing, or we'd be having a conversation, I'd be interviewing you, one of the things that kept coming up was this idea of, again, you being an inspiration. And again, things don't end at a certain age, and there's still, health permitting, there's still life to live and opportunities to be had.
Right.
Yeah.
And even, this is why I think we have to tell our stories, because even women who have had cancer or have had health problems, they're still pursuing their dream, and they're figuring out really creative ways to do it.
Yeah.
Like one person who was a painter and lost the use of her hands, she worked with designers and invented something she wears on her head that allows her to keep painting.
Nice.
So I think this idea that once you get ill and, disabled, that your life is over. I think, many women I know, many men I know are really not settling.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I keep almost quoting things from your book, but there is this idea of age and growing older, and you get to be all the yous that you've been, and then almost getting to look forward to the you that you will be. And so I like that idea as well.
Yeah, because you're always, for me, I've always been reinventing from the moment, I was a young child. And I joke around with my family and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to be reinventing my death. So stay tuned. And, I'm already having conversations with them about, I want a green burial. I want my organic matter to become a new tree. And they're like, Mom, but
it's like almost too soon, but
yeah, I mean, I guess we always feel that it's something to fear.
Yeah.
And I learned from being present during the moment of my mother's death that it is not what we think it is.
Okay. Ooh, okay. So I think we can keep going. I'm not yet seeing the question. So I guess going to family. Family is also something you talk about very dearly in your book. You know, there's sort of the generation of women in your family you spoke to, and then also you being a grandmother. So I guess what does family look like? What has family meant to you these past years? And what has family meant to you these past years? And then we'll go to questions.
Sure. Well, I think, you know, I am the oldest of 6 children. And so that really has informed the way that I am with my family. Mm-hmm. I'm sort of the oldest sister. Mm-hmm. And so I think my family has always been important to me.
Okay.
And even during the time that I was accidental icon and I was traveling all over the world and things like that, I would always try to make sure that I was having that connection with family. Mm-hmm. And now I am the matriarch after my mother has passed.
Yeah.
And so that's a very different role. Where now, unlike the past, my brothers and my sister and my daughter are kind of looking to how they can take care of and support me. Mm-hmm. And that was always my role.
Yeah.
Right? In my family. So that role has switched. And I have to admit, I kind of like it.
Nice. Nice. Okay, let's take our first question, our first audience question. Okay, so from Jillian, who were your icons growing up and who are your icons now?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think my icons growing up, believe it or not, were my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, who was a very rebellious woman. In the book, I talk about it. When my grandfather died, she was my age when I started Accidental Icon. And she sold the family homestead and then met up with her sisters and started traveling all over the world for the rest of her life. And so I always thought she was so cool and so glamorous. And then the other icons I had were actually nuns, because they were women who were very much in control of their own life. And I would watch how they would make decisions and get around authority figures and control their space, which was the schools. I am very much interested in older women who are continuing to do their art. So Patti Smith is someone who I think is amazing at this time in life. My icons have always been people like David Bowie and Tilda Swinton, who are always and forever reinventing. And I think also a lot of my icons come from books. And during different times of my life, I would read about someone in a book who would be someone I would aspire to and could learn from. So, yeah.
Nice. Okay.
And let me just say that I often didn't look outside of my everyday life for icons, because in my work as a social worker, I was privileged to meet the most extraordinary women and girls who inspired me every single day and gave me the privilege of being a witness. And so that's where I found my icons.
Nice. Yeah, the people around us. I like that. Okay, next question we have from Reality. I have a question for the Q&A later. What is the most significant advice you would give to a younger individual?
I would say don't be afraid of being old. And one of the things I've been saying to young women, right, because a lot of the women I'm speaking to now who are in that middle, they do not have enough money. Some of them do not have families. They have been divorced. So I think what I'm saying to young women is there's also all these other women and those women who are doing the most creative things, who, when they were younger, could not do certain things because of their career or their marriage, or they would lose themselves.
Yeah.
Being old is when you find yourself. And so I'm telling all young women, you have Pinterest boards to make a new bathroom. Make a Pinterest board of who you want to be as an older woman.
Yeah.
And then I can talk to you and I'll tell you what you need to do to make that happen.
Nice. Nice. Okay. Next question we have from Emily. Any guidance for how you navigated the big ball of loss? Therapy?
Actually, no. I did a lot of work in my prior years in dealing with all of the issues that came up for me during my time as a social worker. I think that by the time I did lose my mom, I had lost my dad. I had other losses in my life. And I understood that it's just going to hurt, and that I had the rest of my family to support me through it. And I wrote it. You know, I wrote it all out in that first draft. And I think sometimes, and as a social worker and myself, I've had clinical training. I've been a clinician. I've done psychoanalysis. But I think sometimes we think that the only answer is therapy. And I'm not against therapy. I think it's amazing. But I think for me, being creative and artistic and expressing yourself through art or other ways of being. And even for me, I started to do more community service in my living community. And so I really, you know, I think probably writing that first draft. And then the second thing is always knowing that when there is a loss, that there will be something that is a gain, that it will be replaced by something. And for me, after my mom died, my daughter, who had been trying for a very, very, very long time to have another child, after the last time she visited my mom before she died, she found out a few weeks after my mom died that she was pregnant. And so while I lost my mother, I gained a grandson.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Who is an amazing part of my life.
Oh, nice. Thank you for sharing. Okay, I think we have a last question. So from Megan, thank you for joining us. What's next? What's next for you?
Well, right now, I'm really doing two things. I am continuing to write. And I am taking creative writing classes. And I am doing what I usually do, which is put myself in experiences that are going to support me in this. And I am very interested because I am in despair about the larger events that are happening in the world and in this country. So I have figured out how I'm handling it is to be very focused on our local community. And there are a lot of people who live here who are also feeling that way. And so I'm putting a lot of effort in making our city continue to be the diverse and equitable and amazing place that it is and that it is becoming.
Nice. Oh, I like that. Yes. I think I can you can keep talking. I think, this idea on what's around you, what can you influence? I think that's a powerful place to be.
Because otherwise, I think many people feel helpless.
Right.
They think they have to do something up here.
Right.
And even if you start by going out on your block and picking up a piece of trash, you're going to then meet another person who's picking up a piece of trash.
Yeah.
And you will find that those things grow.
Yeah.
But they also will help you keep hope alive.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. I think, and hope is so powerful. It's hard and it's powerful. Yeah. Okay, Lyn, I think we're getting to the end of our conversation. First, I'd like to thank our audience members. Thank you for joining. Thank you for your questions. Lyn, thank you so much for sharing with us. Thank you for talking. I enjoyed our conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for having great questions. And I enjoyed our conversation too.
Thank you. Okay, so everyone, Lyn's book is How to Be Old, Lessons in Living Boldly from the Accidental Icon. Again, thank you for your time. I hope you have a good rest of the day. Right. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.